caught up in all the hype. And if Tupac came back from the dead now to hear this interview, he would agree. They got caught up.
Me and Pac went in the studio and did a song together. And then them little dudes.
Outlaws.
Yeah.
Outlaws.
They came, like, as soon as we got there, they came up to Pac talking about, yo, Lauryn Hill dissed you, Mobb Deep.
KRS-One just dropped a bomb about Big Daddy Kane and Tupac's relationship, and it's not what most people think. For years, the streets been whispering like Kane and Pac were at odds, but KRS says that's straight up false. These two weren't enemies at all. In fact, there was respect between them. So why does it seem like history painted them as rivals? That's where Suge Knight comes in. Suge was the king of pushing storylines, making rappers pick sides, and turning real life into a non-stop soap opera. East Coast versus West Coast wasn't just beef, it was a business plan. It sold records, filled up magazines, and kept TV cameras chasing the chaos. But Big Daddy Kane, he wasn't playing into Suge's little chess game.
Eric B tried to sign you to Death Row East at one point?
Yeah.
What happened with that?
He called and said, Suge trying to, build a Death Row East, man. I think it might be a good look for you. So I went out there, and like when I walked in, these two big-ass Rockwilders came, and then Suge, he comes out the back. They come running around, sniffing around me and stuff, sits down with his cigar, sits his cigar down and does this. And both the dogs ran and sat down next to him. So I'm like, okay, this one of them meetings. He said, well, what you want? A $400,000 advance. Why you ain't just simply say $500,000? Man, you Big Daddy Kane, man. I can't see myself signing you for less than $1 million. I gotta give you $1 million. He said, you already a household name. But then he was like, well, yo, look, I don't know how you doing financially, but if you want, I can just give you $100K in the morning. That's when I knew it was time to go. I was like, you just gonna give me $100,000 with no agreement? Nah, I was like, I'll let you know tomorrow. And then I went and switched my flight to like a 6 a.m. joint.
Kane stayed focused on his own lane, while Pac got dragged into the drama whether he wanted it or not. According to KRS, any so-called tension between them was more industry manipulation than anything real. Suge thrived off keeping artists divided, and Kane refusing to play ball made him a piece of Suge's messy puzzle without even trying. And here's the kicker. Kane was even approached to join Death Row, but turned it down. That single decision had people throwing his name into stories he never asked for. Yet behind the curtains, Kane and Pac had a whole different bond. They shared mutual respect, private convos, and even unreleased collabs nobody outside the circle ever got to hear.
You being a respected lyricist, how you feel about the people that push the narrative and say that Tupac, he wasn't a lyricist?
Okay, but hold up. Tupac is a lyricist. See what I'm saying? It's just that he's not one of those lyrical MCs that spit stuff, but his stuff is, he spit deep lyrics that touch your soul. So I do consider Tupac a lyricist. You know what I'm saying? Even though his stuff is about substance, I do consider him a lyricist, because it's like this here. You have to be lyrical to touch someone's soul, to make someone feel like, yo, I don't know this man, but he knows my pain. You see what I'm saying? So I do consider Tupac a lyricist.
Back in the mid-90s, Suge Knight was on a mission to grow his empire, and that's when he cooked up Death Row East. This was Suge's big play to take over the East Coast, and he needed a Brooklyn heavyweight to front the movement. Who better than Big Daddy Kane, one of the sharpest lyricists out the borough? Kane himself later confirmed that the offer was real, a $100,000 advance, and a deal that could have changed the whole game. But Kane wasn't falling for it. He straight up turned it down, saying he wasn't about to get sucked into that circus.
I understand they got caught up in all the hype. And if Tupac came back from the dead now to hear this interview, he would agree. They got caught up in the hype. And Public Enemy prophesied, don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. And they got caught up. Biggie, they all got caught up, and it's a shame because we ain't supposed to go out like that.
That choice instantly marked him as a neutral figure in the rising East Coast versus West Coast storm. Think about it. Nobody dropped 6 figures on the table without expecting something back. Kane peeped the strings attached, saw the devil in the details, and walked away without selling his soul. And here's where it gets deeper. It wasn't just about the money. By rejecting Death Row East, Kane was refusing to let Suge drag him into a fake beef with Tupac. Suge's plan was to pit Kane against Pac and stir up even more chaos, but Kane wasn't buying the script. What people didn't realize is that behind all the headlines, Kane and Pac actually respected each other, and Kane's move kept that bond alive instead of letting Suge spin it into war. KRS-One has been crystal clear in interviews. Big Daddy Kane never had beef with Tupac. None. He said over and over that Kane and Pac actually had way more in common than people realized. But the sad truth is, Pac got dragged into the media circus of the East Coast versus West Coast madness, a storm he couldn't escape once Suge and the industry started milking it. Kane, on the other hand, saw Pac's gift early on and never hesitated to defend him.
Can't say it's an East Coast-West Coast rivalry, number one. People were starting to say it's an East Coast-West Coast rivalry because it was people that's trying to make money. It was true people trying to make careers. It was people trying to get famous. It was people hustling other people out of money on the East Coast. You don't have no team, you need us. We from the East Coast, pay us X amount of dollars for protection. And some of these idiots was doing it. For us, how we looked at it is, we looked at it as we representing the West Coast.
While critics tried to downplay Pac's pen game, Kane was shutting that talk down. He respected Pac's artistry from day one and wasn't afraid to say it. And here's the jam. There's a story about an unreleased track they cooked up together called Wherever You Are. The joint never officially saw daylight, but insiders swear Pac held his own standing toe-to-toe with a lyrical legend like Kane. Anybody claiming Pac wasn't a lyricist clearly hasn't heard what he laid down on that record. But the bond between Kane and Pac went deeper than music. They were both tied to the teachings of the 5% Nation, also known as the Nation of Gods and Earths. That movement, born in Harlem back in the 60s, taught that black people are the original people of the planet and that real power comes from knowledge of self. That shared connection was another layer of respect that no industry beef could touch. At its core, the 5% Nation was all about knowledge, self-awareness, and true empowerment. Big Daddy Kane got into it early in the 80s, and you can hear it dripping through his lyrics. He wasn't just rapping to sound slick, he was weaving in concepts like supreme mathematics and the supreme alphabet, dropping codes that hit different if you knew the science.
This institution can never side with, come under, understand the exploitation of our culture. Never will you ever see me standing in the environment where our culture is being exploited. Or if you do see me there, the next moment this thing's gonna fall. I'm there to bring this shit down. If you see me in a situation like that, you should say, yo, watch out. Something's about to happen. Turn your cameras on. Something's about to go down. Why is Chris here? Why is he here? Something's about to, he gonna say some shit right now that is gonna,
Even if you didn't, it made his rhymes sharper, layered, and way more thoughtful than your average bar. Just listen to tracks like The Wrath of Kane. You'll catch those references clear as day. Now, Tupac's connection was a little different. He wasn't officially initiated into the 5% Nation, but the teachings still found their way to him. Back in his Baltimore days, he got exposed to the culture, and through his mother, Afeni Shakur, a fearless former Black Panther, Pac grew up breathing revolutionary ideas. That spirit of self-knowledge, empowerment, and pushing back against oppression wasn't just a phase for him. It showed up in everything. From his interviews to his lyrics, you could feel the fire of those teachings fueling his words. So even though Kane was holding down the East and Pac became the voice of the West, the industry's attempt to turn them into enemies never really stuck. Deep down, they shared a philosophy, a worldview rooted in empowerment and knowledge of self. And that bond, that common ground, gave them an unshakable respect for one another, no matter how hard the game tried to twist the narrative.
Those West Coast things, it just got out of control. Dudes was getting killed, and I felt responsible.
but I couldn't stop it.
We ain't mad at the whole spot in New York, we just mad at certain people.
I got this new project coming out along with some other brothers called One Nation, and it's like an East Coast, West Coast collaboration to kill this whole new vibe everybody want to be on about it being a war between the East Coast and the West Coast.
Right.
It's really just a problem with two rappers.
And the East Coast, West Coast thing is something that the journalists and people are making up just to get paid off it so it can drag out and everybody can have albums. They're perpetuating it so it can be drama. When it all go down, don't look at me and Biggie and be like, why is there a big East Coast, West Coast war when you're shooting this to 300 homes, 300 countries, telling them about an East Coast, West Coast war that they would never know exists. So that's where information becomes a problem. We both need to exercise greater restraint.
Damn.
But here's where it really gets wild. Suge Knight wasn't just running a label, he was running the streets like a movie director, controlling the whole script. Death Row Records was on fire, and Suge knew exactly what sold the most records. Pure drama. The East Coast versus West Coast rivalry wasn't just beef, it was the ultimate marketing tool. And Suge wasn't shy about creating chaos just to keep the cameras flashing and the headlines rolling. His play with Big Daddy Kane was slick but calculated. By dangling that Death Row East offer, Suge was really trying to pull a respected East Coast legend straight into his West Coast story. If Kane had taken that deal, it would have looked like he picked a side in the war. But Kane flipped the script by refusing, and that move made him unpredictable. Suddenly, the media painted Kane as the lone figure refusing to take sides while the rest of the game was drowning in hype. And with Suge's influence, even staying neutral came off like a bold statement. But Pac, he never had that option. The moment he inked his name with Death Row, he became Suge's flagship artist, the face of the West in the middle of the storm. From magazines to TV interviews to radio spins, the feud became part of Pac's brand whether he wanted it or not. And while Pac was naturally outspoken, fiery, and unfiltered, a lot of the tension people saw between him and East Coast artists was pushed, twisted, and sometimes straight up manufactured by the same label machine feeding the fire. And KRS-One peeped all of this from the jump. That's exactly why he refused to play the industry's dirty games and kept calling out how the system was exploiting black artists. He knew the truth. The so-called rivalry wasn't just Suge Knight's doing. It was a whole machine behind the curtain. See, in the 90s, the record industry had layers on top of layers pulling strings. Executives, A&R reps, even the media itself had money tied up in keeping the East Coast versus West Coast story alive. Album sales shot through the roof, magazines flew off shelves, and TV ratings exploded every time some beef hit the headlines. The more drama, the more dollars, plain and simple. And here's the shady part. Sometimes artists were straight up pressured to throw shots, even when they didn't want to. Other times their words got chopped, twisted, and edited, just so the media could make it look like feuds existed that never really did. Big Daddy Kane and Tupac are perfect examples of this mess. Both of them were respected, skilled lyricists with deep philosophies, and when they crossed paths, there was nothing but respect. But the narrative flipped it into something else entirely. Suge and his allies understood one thing. Fans couldn't resist conflict. They knew people would keep buying records and tuning in if they believed a war was happening. And Suge wasn't alone in playing that game either. East Coast labels like Bad Boy, along with other big execs, added their fuel to the fire, making sure the rivalry never cooled down. Suge Knight had the spotlight and the muscle, and he knew how to use both. He ruled Death Row with fear, loyalty, and raw street credibility. And that's how he kept his artists in line while pushing the narrative he wanted. And guess what? Tupac, with his explosive energy and temper, became the perfect weapon for Suge's strategy. Pac's fire made headlines, sold records, and kept the spotlight exactly where Suge wanted it. Big Daddy Kane, though, wasn't built to play that role. He stayed cautious, refusing to let himself be used as a pawn in someone else's game. But even Kane's refusal didn't escape the spin. The media twisted his silence into a storyline, turning his neutrality into some kind of hidden message that never even existed. Meanwhile, while fans were glued to this beef, the real machine kept grinding. The industry was busy locking down contracts, slicing cuts out of collabs, and pushing out albums that raked in millions. The East Coast versus West Coast war didn't just sell music, it sold attention, hype, and raw influence. Executives like Suge understood one cold truth. Controlling perception was just as profitable as controlling record sales, and that's exactly why the story of Big Daddy Kane and Tupac matters so much, because it shows how the industry could twist respect into rivalry just to keep the money flowing. At the end of the day, the truth cuts deeper than the headlines ever did. Big Daddy Kane and Tupac weren't enemies. They were two legends caught in the middle of a game way bigger than them. The industry wanted a war, and Suge Knight made sure the world believed one was happening, even if it meant twisting stories, spreading half-truths, and turning respect into rivalry just to stack more money. Kane's decision to turn down Death Row East showed just how smart he was. He saw the trap and refused to step in it. And Pac, he didn't have the same luxury. Once Suge had him under that contract, Pac became the face of the feud, whether he wanted to or not. That's the tragedy. The world got the drama, but behind the scenes there was real respect, mutual admiration, and even unreleased work between Kane and Pac that never got to shine. And that's the part people forget. The so-called beef wasn't real. It was manufactured by a system that knew chaos sold better than truth. Kane and Pac actually shared more than just music. They shared philosophy, they shared values, and they shared a vision rooted in self-knowledge and empowerment. It's a hard reminder that the history books on hip-hop don't always tell the full truth. The chaos of the 90s wasn't just organic beef. It was a script. And Suge Knight, along with the industry execs pulling strings behind the curtain, were the directors. They got the money, the power, and the headlines, while the artists themselves were left stuck in the middle of a war they didn't fully choose. Looking back now, it's clear the so-called East Coast versus West Coast war wasn't just about two regions or two camps going at it. It was a carefully staged drama, a money-making machine, where tension meant sales and headlines meant profit. And Suge, he played one of the biggest roles in keeping that fire blazing. Big Daddy Kane and Tupac never fit neatly into that script, and that's exactly why their real relationship, built on respect, philosophy, and understanding, barely ever gets spoken about. The truth didn't sell as well as the chaos, so it got buried while the fake narrative ran wild. So what do you think? Was Suge in the industry's hand in manufacturing this so-called Coast War, the biggest scam in hip-hop history? And does Kane and Pac's hidden bond change how you see that whole era? Drop your thoughts in the comments, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.